Hey, welcome back to the Prayer for Healing podcast. My name is Clark Varon, and today we are in our Genesis series. We're going through all of the stories within Genesis from start to finish, and this story particularly is on how Joseph got sold into Egypt. So in our previous episode, which if you want to watch that episode, you can click this little link right here. But in our previous episode, we saw how Jacob came back from Mesopotamia, where he found his wife, Rachel, and they came down to the promised land, to the land of Canaan, the land of his father Abraham, right? And so he comes back down, and we're going to learn some stories of what all happened in the promised land while he was there. And we're also going to hear about Joseph growing up, having all of these dreams of his brothers and his father worshiping and bowing down to him and whatnot. And he tells his brothers this, and his brothers get pissed. And then his brothers say, dude, you're our little bro. He's the second youngest brother of all the children of Jacob, right? And he's like, you're a little bro. We're not going to bow down to you. So what do? They throw him into a pit. And then as some Ishmaelites are coming by, the brothers sell Joseph off to the Ishmaelites. And then the Ishmaelites, these traders, are on their way down to Egypt. They end up selling him to the Egyptians. And that's how Joseph gets into Egypt. And that lays the foundation for all of the Jews, all of the house of Israel, the house of Jacob, right? To end up in Egypt. And then all of these children of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, right, are the 12 children of Jacob, end up growing up in Egypt. They become slaves, and then they will eventually receive the exodus out of Egypt, coming back into the promised land. But they all got there to Egypt in the first place. Why? Because the stories that we are about to learn in this section of Genesis, right here, right now, when Joseph gets sold into Egypt. Let's dive in.
You are listening to the Prayer for Healing podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join our online community. You can join us for a Bible study or a prayer session and start to get involved and meet the other people within the community. And I'd also like to invite you, since you're interested in the book of Enoch, to check out our new book, Enoch, a Great Prophet. This is a children's book that tells Enoch's story in a way that you've never heard before. It takes all of this complicated text and it presses it down into a story that even a third grader can understand, and I know that you will love. You can find all the links that you need in the description below.
All right, so we are currently in chapter 34 of the book of Genesis right now. And what happens in chapter 34 right here is before we start to see Joseph getting sold off into slavery, we actually see some events that take place in the promised land after Jacob and his wife return from Mesopotamia, right? One of the first things that happens here is that Dinah, one of Jacob's children, in fact, the daughter that he had with Leah, ends up getting defiled, right? So Dinah gets defiled by Shechem, the son of Hamor, aka the prince of the land, right? So he comes back with a trade for Dinah. Shechem does. Now Hamor spoke with them saying, the soul of my son Shechem. So this is now Shechem, the guy who basically defiled Dinah, right? The father of the guy who defiled Dinah is now going to talk to Dinah's family and basically saying, we want to have Dinah for our son as his wife, right? So Hamor spoke with them saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Okay? So he's asking for Dinah as the wife of his child. Make marriages with us. Give us your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. Basically, he's saying, hey, you house of Israel, you guys can take our daughters as wives. We'll take your daughters as wives, and we'll just intermarry, and it'll be great. It'll keep the peace in the land and all this stuff, right? And you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it and get property in it. Basically, what he's saying is we are currently like enemies, right? It's not great for you to be living here. This is actually our land. You guys are the visitors here. But if you give Dinah to my son, Shechem, then you'll be safe. We'll be intermarried, and it'll create this family bond, and it will not be enemies with each other. This is a very common way of contract between two enemy nations or tribes or whatever in ancient days. They would marry each other and there would be peace. And this is basically what he's proposing. Let's let there be peace, right? So what we hear then after this is basically Shechem says, ask me for a great bride price and gift as you will. He basically is saying, I'm even willing to pay for Dinah as my wife, right? And I will give you whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. He's begging, just Genesis 34:12. And then Dinah's brothers, what they say is they actually say something to deceive him. It's super funny what's about to happen. Funny, kind of gross. We cannot do this thing to give our sister to the one who is uncircumcised, right? He's basically saying, is like, we're all circumcised. It's an oath that we made with God. We can't give our sister away to someone who's uncircumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. So the brothers are now actually deceiving Shechem and deceiving Hamor, saying, the only way this will work, the only way that we can possibly agree is if you guys get circumcised. So what happens next is that everyone in the house of Shechem, in the house of Hamor, everyone, all the Canaanites get circumcised, right? And so Shechem preaches circumcision to everyone. But remember, he's the prince of the land, so he has huge authority. He preaches circumcision to everyone, and everyone gets circumcised. And it says here, Genesis chapter 34, verse 19 and 24, the young man did not delay to do the thing. What a cute word, the thing. And all who went out to the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised. Every male. Can you imagine the authority that would take to convince every guy in this town to get circumcised? And now the brothers see their opportunity and they take out their revenge, right? They take out their revenge on Shechem for defiling their sister Dinah. So on the third day, when they were sore, why were they sore? Use your imagination. Two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and they came against the city while it felt secure and killed all of the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and they went away. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all of their wealth they captured and plundered. So they went in, and while all of the men were like unable to defend themselves because they were sore, they went and they slaughtered all of the men, and then they plundered the city and took their sister, right, with them and said, you cannot have our sister. You defiled her. We're not going to hand her over. That was a deception. The idea of them all getting circumcised to become like this was a pure deception so that they could get the revenge on these people. Now Jacob, their father, right? It was Jacob's sons that ended up going in and taking the swords and slaughtering the city. But Jacob, the father, was totally upset about this. And he basically, you've destroyed our name in this place, right? Everyone who hears about this, we are now the enemy of everyone who lives in this land because of what we have done. So Jacob did not approve at all. And at this time, Jacob actually relocates from Shechem to Bethel for good reason, because they're now an enemy of everyone in the land, right? So God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau, right? So he says, go to Bethel and make an altar. So Jacob commands his whole household to leave behind all of the foreign gods. Now, if you remember that Rachel, when they had left Mesopotamia, Rachel stole her father's idols. So by Jacob commanding, hey, we need to leave behind all of these foreign gods, he's now making this stance in his own faith. This is a huge moment in Jacob's faith journey, where prior he was somewhat tolerating idolatry. At this point, we can no longer tolerate idolatry. God is calling me to build an altar. So Jacob ends up building an altar. And God said to him, your name is Jacob. No longer shall your name be called Jacob. So God's about to give Jacob a new name. What is his new name? Can you guess? But Israel shall be your name. This is where the nation of Israel comes from. So Jacob's name is now Israel. This is where the name nation of Israel comes from. It's because all of the descendants of Israel come from Jacob, who was renamed to Israel, right? So he called his name Israel. God called him Israel. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come down from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you. This is one of the reasons why in the Bible, when we repeatedly say the title of God being the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, right, is the God of the Bible. And we see this and we know that it's the same God, right? This powerful God that 3 times to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob made the same promise, saying, I'm going to turn you into a great nation, right? I'm going to turn you into a great nation, and kings will come from you, right? And you will spend, you remember he promised to Abraham, your descendants will go into the land of Egypt, and then they will escape into this promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, right? So this is the reason why we call God in the Bible, why God is so frequently referred to as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, is because 3 times he made a covenant with each one of those people. So the next little parts of the story before we dive into Joseph is Rachel, which remember is Jacob's favorite wife. She actually dies in childbirth. So she gives birth to Benjamin, the 12th child. This is the 12th tribe of Israel, is Benjamin, right? The youngest, the baby of the family. And then Rachel passes away, right? So at this point, the 12 tribes of Israel are now laid out. There are 12 sons who are descendants of Jacob, of Israel. He's now renamed Israel. 12 sons, those become the 12 tribes of Israel, right? Now, at this point, Joseph, who is the first son to Rachel, right, which is Jacob's favorite wife. Rachel only birthed Joseph and Benjamin. So the firstborn, Joseph, is the favorite of Jacob. It's the favorite child of Jacob. And so when Joseph was 17 years old, he started to have these dreams. And now his brothers already didn't like him. And the reason why I didn't like him was because he was the obvious favorite of Jacob. And it says here in Genesis chapter 37, verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, and he made him a robe of many colors. Some translations say a robe with long sleeves, but here it says a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So because he was the favorite child, he was actually the least favorite among all of his brothers. Now, to make matters worse, Joseph lacks some social skills, and he tells his brothers about his dreams that he has, which are not ideal for his brothers, who basically are saying, Joseph, do you think we're going to worship you? What's the deal here? So it says here in Genesis, now Joseph had a dream, and when he told to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. And behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves fathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? His brothers, do you think your dream is telling you that you are going to reign over us, right? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And then Joseph had a second dream. And then this time, his own father rebukes his dream, right? So he says, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon. Now the sun representing his father and the moon representing his mother. And 11 stars representing his brothers, his 11 brothers, were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? He's saying, do you really think that we're going to end up bowing before you? You're out of your mind, Joseph, right? Even his father denies him. And so he's building up all this animosity in his family. And then the next thing, he actually gets sold into slavery. So one day he goes out to pasture the flock with his brothers, and his brothers, when they see him coming, they make a plot to kill him. So Genesis chapter 37, verse 18 says, they saw him, his brothers saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. So they have decided now to kill Joseph. But when Reuben heard it, Reuben being the oldest brother, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of the hand to restore him to his father. So Reuben plans to actually save Joseph. Reuben sees this plan. He's like, I don't agree. We should definitely not kill Joseph. That is not the right thing to do. And so Reuben chooses, he's like, instead of letting them kill him, why don't I just convince them to throw him in the pit and I'm going to rescue him later, right? And so they throw him into the pit. And now Reuben's plan was to rescue him later, but before Reuben could come rescue him, what happens is a caravan of Ishmaelites. So Ishmaelites, if you remember Isaac and Ishmaelites are basically like the forefathers of Muslims, right? The Ishmaelites pass by on their way to Egypt. They're traders, right? They're traders in the land of Arabia. And so they pass by, and then Judah sends to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? He's basically saying, we're not going to get anything out of killing him, right? Come, instead, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, right? So instead, he's like, we can make a little profit off of this guy. Let's sell him as a slave. And so they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit. And they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Now, 20 shekels of silver. This is how much they sold him for. Do you have any guess of how much money that is? Do you think that's a large amount of money, a small amount of money, a tiny amount of money? It's for a human life, for a slave, I would say it's a tiny amount of money. Actually, about $215 is how much his brothers charged the Ishmaelites for selling Joseph into slavery. So Joseph's life gets sold into slavery for $215. With the inflation that's happening today, that's 3 or 4 meals at a nice restaurant. And so what ends up happening is Reuben was not there at that time when they sold him into slavery. And then Reuben actually returns back to the pit later to think, hey, now it's my time to actually go save Joseph and drag him out of the pit. So it says here in Genesis chapter 37, when Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone, and where shall I go? So Reuben at this point starts to fear his father. He basically fears that what's my father going to think of me, right? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. So here they're saying basically like we need to pretend like it's not us that killed him, but something else killed him. A wild animal killed him, right? And so they bring back this bloody robe to Jacob. And Jacob sees the robe and he tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days because he believed that a wild animal had attacked Joseph and had killed him. Not, obviously, that his own sons had sold him off into slavery, right? Now, what happens with Joseph when he gets sold off into slavery? It says here, meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So Joseph actually gets sold off to an officer of Pharaoh and basically being 2 degrees away from the Pharaoh. And that's super important because it's going to set him up in the future to actually become the right hand of the Pharaoh, which is a story that we're going to cover in the next episode. Now, before we go back to Egypt, we follow basically Joseph's story through all of Egypt. There's one more chapter here in the book of Genesis. It's chapter 38. One of the most surprising chapters that you could imagine in the Bible. And it's one of these very graphic chapters. Like, why is this so important? Why is this even in here, right? It's sexually graphic. And the reason why this is so important, this is the story of Judah and Tamar, right? And Judah, if you remember, is actually the forefather. Basically, it's him, the house of Judah, that Jesus was born into, also that King David was born into. And so it's really important for Jewish history to be able to track the lineage of Judah. And so we actually get some insight into the house of Judah and what ends up happening. Now, what we learn here in chapter 38 is that Judah actually marries a Canaanite woman, right? and he has a son named Er, right? So Judah's firstborn son named Er. Now, what we learn here is Er is not really a good guy. And it says Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord actually put him to death, right? But Er had married this woman named Tamar. So now Judah has a daughter-in-law named Tamar. And it's Jewish custom that if your brother dies, then it's your job as his brother to essentially marry and have relations with your brother's wife so that she's not just a widow without any children. And this is called the Levirate marriage. So if your brother dies and his wife is left as a widow without any children, then you have to sleep with your brother's wife to help her bear children, to basically help carry on the family line of your brother. So, true story. This is what it says here in chapter 30 of the Bible. It says, now Judah said to Onan, Er's brother, right? Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. So remember, Er passed away. Onan is now filling in the shoes of Er to sleep with Tamar, Er's wife, who's now a widow. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would actually waste the semen on the ground so as to not give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and so the Lord put him to death also. So this is a very graphic sight. Basically, Onan, he purposefully is not bearing children for Tamar, and the Lord cares enough about Tamar that Onan is now put to death. And so at this point, you can imagine Judah is like, oh my gosh, I lost my first son. I lost my second son. This woman, Tamar, she must be bad luck or something. And he has one more son. And what he says to Tamar is he basically says to wait until his third son, Shelah, is of age so that he can perform the duty. So she, Tamar, saw many years later that Shelah had grown up and she had not been given him in marriage. So Judah at this point is like, my first two children who married you or were, performing the duty of giving you children, right, both passed away. And so although Judah knew that it was right, according to the custom, to give Shelah as a husband to Tamar, he says, I don't think so. I'm holding Shelah back. So what does Tamar do? This is one of the most shocking stories of the entire Bible. Tamar actually pretends to be a prostitute. So what happens is she pretends to be a prostitute and she stops Judah on his way on the road, and they actually end up having relations together. So what happens is Judah turned to her at the roadside and said, now remember, Judah does not know, Tamar's got her face covered, so Judah has no idea that this is Tamar. He thinks that this is just like a roadside prostitute, right? So he says, come, let me come into you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law, Tamar. She said, what will you give me that you may come into me? Basically, she's like, pay up, bro. This is my work. And he answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge, basically, I want collateral, right? If you give me a pledge until you send it. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she's got this collateral, right? The signet, the cord, and the staff of Judah. And she is now pregnant by Judah after pretending to be a prostitute. And so what ends up happening is Judah ends up going home, and then he ends up sending a friend to go deliver the collateral, to go deliver the goat. But Tamar runs away. She doesn't actually care about the goat. She wanted the child, right? She wanted the child that was owed to her by Judah's children. But because Judah's children would not marry her or give her children, she can Judah to give her children. But now Tamar is pregnant, and look what happens. It says about 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Now Judah has no idea that she has been immoral. She's now pregnant with his own child. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. So she has slept with somebody else and she's pregnant because of it. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. So Judah, not knowing that it's him who actually performed the immorality with Tamar, is now going to persecute, is now going to burn and kill Tamar. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. By the man to whom these belong, she's about to bring out the collateral that belongs to Judah. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, wow, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her my son Shelah. So she basically confesses, she's the only reason why I did this is because you withheld your son Shelah from me. And so I had to do what I should not have had to do because of your immorality. And Judah owns up to it and says, you're right, I was immoral. And you're right, you are more moral than me, right? By tricking me into sleeping with you to give you children. So Tamar ends up giving birth to twins, Perez and Zerah. And the reason why we hear this birth story is because it foretells some of the events that happened in the house of Judah, right? So Perez was actually the firstborn. Now, the firstborn is typically where the lineage follows, right? So they're twins, right? Perez was the firstborn. And so the midwife ties a scarlet thread around Perez's wrists, right? In order to identify that this is the firstborn child. But Perez, as he's being born, actually takes that scarlet thread and gives it to Zerah. And afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So what we see here is some insight that something fishy, something is going to happen in this house of Judah, between Perez and Zerah, and that we should really be paying attention to the line of Judah through Judah's child, Zerah, right? This is what the Bible's like warming us up to. That's why this story is in the Bible. It's an important story to understanding the house of Judah, which becomes the house of David and the house of Jesus. That's why this story made it into the Bible, despite it being like a crazy story of sexual immorality. And with that, we wrap up today's story. Next episode, we will be diving into actually following Joseph in the land of Egypt and hearing about all of the adventures that Joseph has, being sold into slavery, being framed, being thrown into prison, and then his rise of power within Egypt. So to watch that next episode, click this link right here, and you can continue to follow along this Bible story series in the book of Genesis. See you there.
Hey, thanks again for watching this episode. My name's Clark Varon, and you're listening to the Prayer for Healing podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below, and join one of our online communities. We've got Bible studies and prayer sessions, and they're a ton of fun. I'm sure you're going to love them, and we would love to meet you. And don't forget that we have a new book out called Enoch, a Great Prophet. If you're interested in learning more about the book of Enoch, this book is going to be great for you. It's written in a way that your children will understand and that you will love, and even Bible scholars would approve of, because it's an accurate story of all of this complicated text pressed down into one easy to understand children's book. So go ahead, you can order that at enochbook.co. That's enochbook.co. All the links that you'll need to our prayer sessions and our Bible studies and the Enoch book are in the description below.